Have you ever made a mistake, done something that you regret? Wished that you could take back words that you had spoken, or wished that you had spoken up instead of being silent? Edmund Burke said, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could do only a little." In 1987, Sherry Watson had a traumatic brain injury. I forgot to tell you. I'm going to tell you 3 stories about 3 women that I greatly admire who did not make the greater mistake. The first one is Sherry Watson. She had a traumatic brain injury from an accident. And as a result of that, she had to learn how to speak, how even to swallow. She had to learn how to walk over again by rolling on the floor first and learning how to crawl and then how to walk. She began an organization with other disabled people because she wanted to go to her favorite restaurant after a couple years of rehab where she was in a wheelchair. And when she got to her favorite restaurant, she couldn't get in because the door wasn't wide enough for her wheelchair. And then when they took her out and got her in and set her up and all over again, she needed to go to the bathroom. She couldn't use the bathroom at her favorite restaurant because it wasn't wide enough and didn't have grip bars. She got together a grassroots movement to work for rights for disabled people. And as a result of her efforts, in 1990, the American Disabilities Act was enacted, and it is the only law in our land that was written by a not-for-profit rather than policymakers. And that's all due to Sherry saying to herself, I can do something. It may only be a little, but I can do something. She did not make that greater mistake of saying, oh, I can't do anything because I can only do a little. The second woman I'd like to talk to you about is a gal whose little daughter, 13 years old, was walking alongside the road on her way to school when a drunk driver swerved, hit her daughter, and killed her. She got mad. She created MADD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And all of us, I think, know about Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. They have done amazing work in increasing the laws against drunk driving and changing our society's acceptance of drunk driving to not accepting drunk driving. You don't let a friend drive drunk. Comes directly from that organization. MAD believes that they have reduced drunk driving by half since it was founded. Candy Lightner, whose daughter was killed, did not make the greater mistake of saying, oh, I can't do enough. I can only do a little, so I'm not going to do anything. That greater mistake of saying, do nothing when you're speaking to yourself rather than do something. The third story I'd like to tell you about is a very personal story. It's about my mom. Completely different kind of story. But when I was in 19 or so, I got engaged to my boyfriend. And I went home, yay, look, Mom, my ring. Steve asked me to marry him. And the result was absolute silence. I got mad in a little different way. I said, this is supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, or one of the happiest moments of my life, and all you can do is just scowl at me and say nothing? I got mad. I slammed my door of my bedroom, threw myself on the bed crying, and I knew something was really wrong when my mom didn't yell at me for slamming the door, because she always yells at me for slamming the door. Well, Mom and I kind of avoided each other for a few days, but Mom finally cornered me in the laundry room, and she began to talk to me. Sharon, this is what I see your life is going to be like if you marry Steve. I'm going, I don't think you understand me. I'm 19. I know everything. You don't really understand Steve. Let me tell you what I see. And she began truly to write out and draw a picture in my mind of exactly what my life would be like if I married him. And she even went to the point where she projected out in the future that when we had children, that there would come a point in time when I would leave him, when he started abusing my kids, our kids. And that absolutely blew my mind because I knew deep inside my heart she was right. I would have taken that abuse myself, but I would not have stood up for it for my kids. So I had many, many thoughts because she told me the truth. She spoke that truth into my life. I knew she was right in the core of my being. I broke up with that loser. That was the best decision I made. My mom did not make the greater mistake of doing nothing because she could only do a little. Maybe you have never suffered some loved one dying in a tragic accident. Maybe you've never had a wayward daughter who needed some words of truth spoken into her life. Maybe you've never suffered a severe health issue, and I hope none of those things happen to you. But there are opportunities every day all around us where we can do something, even a little. But if all of us do a little, we can accomplish something. So my wish for you is that you do not make the greater mistake to do nothing because you could do only a little. Mr. Toastmaster.
Dear fellow Toastmasters, wonderful to see you all here today, miles apart in one room. Sharon, and a greater mistake. This was wide open. Where is it going to go? You went on with this. You had a very smooth opening. And right after you opened, you went into an apology. And I thought, oh, wow, you could have just bridged across. You didn't need to do the apology. You could have just gone into, as you began to open, and then drop into a different voice and say, and I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and then go into it. We would have never known that you had originally forgotten it. Your hand gestures throughout the speech, I thought, really worked well. They were simple, there was some articulation to it, and they were descriptive as to what it was that you were doing. And I can appreciate that because it wasn't all over the place. It fit the points as you pointed here, there, wherever. Then you went on and told us, I'm going to be telling you 3 stories. Then you turned around and told us the first story about ADD. You gave us a brief history. So I'm aware of it. I remember when it was enacted and it brought it back to me. Yes, I'm familiar with that. And I can remember some of the conversations. And then you moved right on to the next one, and it's MADD, mad. And I thought, wow, what's going on here? 2 of them, ADD, MADD. And you told us the background on that one. And I can remember that too. So I thought, well, this is informative. This is very valuable. I like this. And then you went to the 3rd speech about your mom. So at that point, my brain wiped out the ADD, MADD, because I thought, I'm not sure how she's going to swing it together. And then you went in to talk about my mom. And what I found interesting about that is it brought most of us in because if we've had children or we have nieces and nephews, we're also familiar with this, about families. And then you told a story about a young girl, you, and what you went through. I thought that hit it. The door slamming. When the door slamming, and you mentioned the fact that when you slammed the door after she told you nothing, she just looked at you, and she didn't do anything. I thought, wow, you could have said, I slammed the door, and she said nothing, and she always would have. From that point, you went on to the next, and you related at the end of that she looked at you and told you, you said that you left the loser. And I thought, wow, here's a place, pause, and then say, and I left the loser. Drop that voice down just a little bit. I found it to be a great short, informative, and valuable speech, bringing back material that we're familiar with. And I thank you for recommending and reminding me about the greater mistake of doing nothing. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Cleon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Contest Chair. I appreciated Sharon's speech to us, and I found it to be something that I would characterize as engaging and poignant. It was poignant in having sad moments and also for her a happy moment. There are 3 goals that I have in speaking with you. One would be to identify strengths in Sharon's speech that we might emulate and incorporate in our own speeches to make them stronger as well. Second is that I might offer any suggestions for Sharon's consideration to make her speech even stronger. And then third is to share the impact that Sharon's speech had on me personally. When it comes to strengths, I identified 3 that I'd like to address. And the first, Sharon, is how you began with a question, asking us whether we've made a mistake in our lives. I found that this question was a strength because it immediately engaged the audience, and involvement is always a good thing. In addition, it was a universal question. It didn't exclude anyone, and therefore it was a kind of question that caused us to lean in and become engaged with the speech that you were about to give. The second thing that I appreciated that you did was to tell us in advance that you were going to share 3 stories with us. I saw this as a strength because it gave us a structure for your speech. It allowed us to follow as we went through, and you revisited it and allowed you used it as a tool to recap the speech as well. And another strength I noted was your use of the quote, "Some do nothing because they can do only little." This was poignant. It provided a theme for your speech, and it's something that recurred throughout your speech. Great job. In terms of offering suggestions to you, I might suggest, for example, in your first story where you talked about Sherry and handicapped accessibility, that you use the word her throughout the story numerous times. And I think incorporating Sherry's name again would make it more personal and powerful. In the second story, you began by saying, tell us about a mother who lost her daughter, but didn't identify who she was until later. I think Cindy Leitner was her name, and I think it would have been useful to incorporate that name early as you introduce the speech to help us track that this is a true story, not a fictitious story, and it gives you and the story credibility. And my third suggestion would be to pause. You spoke about some important things such as not being able to access what everyone else can, about losing a daughter, or yourself about this marriage that was called off. Each of these could be more impactful with a pause. Thank you, Sharon, for your speech. It inspired me to go forth, and in every instance, to do what I can, even when that is only very little. So for that, I thank you.
Sharon, a greater mistake. You know, I wondered at first, what kind of greater mistake were we going to talk about? I really like how you captured our attention by asking us the question, have you ever made a mistake? Wish you could take something back? You know, that quote hooked us, I think, that you shared, and it helped put context around your title. And as you went in to start sharing your stories, one thing that you may want to think about is you had to back up to talk about, oh, you're going to share 3 stories. So start out with saying, I'm going to share 3 stories, and then go into the stories. And I just want to say, I like the stories that you picked. I liked that the first 2 stories were about women who didn't take the easy route. They didn't just say, well, here's my lot in life. I'm going to take what life gives me and just stay here. But they made a difference. And I really loved that your speech was an inspiration to all of us to make a difference. Be somebody who will change the world in some small way. Don't make that greater mistake. I loved how with Sherry, you talked about her challenges, but then how she didn't let that hold her down. She worked through that, she worked with that, she got a collection of people together, and eventually started something that has changed millions of lives around the world. With Candy and her daughter creating MAD, I think that the organization, first of all, has done a great service for the entire world. It's helped to bring forth to everybody the point that we have to do something about this plague that really we have with drunk drivers. When you talked about your mom, I think the third story you shared, that made it personal. And I think making your speech personal really enabled us to feel the value that this topic, the greater mistake, making a difference, how it impacted you. And I love the story you shared about your mom, how you talk about her side of the conversation and your side of the conversation. You used your stage well. You used great hand gestures. One thing I would encourage you to change on the second story you shared with Candy's name. You didn't start her name at the beginning, but you shared her name at the end. I was kind of looking for it throughout, thinking, okay, am I going to learn the name of this lady who made such a great difference? So I'm glad you didn't share her story. I'm glad that you spoke with emotion. The pauses you made were effective. Leaning into the camera was a great way to enhance the speech that you shared and the speech that you gave. I really loved hearing your speech. I loved you ended your speech on a note saying, I challenge you, don't make the greater mistake. Thank you, Toastmaster.
Have you ever wished you could hear a speech right at a moment when you needed light in a dark corner or some clarity? For me, Sharon, this speech was exactly that. It was something I needed to hear now. Fellow Toastmasters, and most especially Sharon, I wanted to let you know how much I appreciated this speech now. It seems like we're in a time where we need to think about little moments that give us an opportunity to make big change. In my evaluation of you, I want to cover 3 specific areas. The first is how I saw you. The second is how I heard you. And the third area has to do with more the structure of the speech itself. So first, let me jump right into how I saw you. I thought that you had some really effective gestures. For example, you started the speech with, could you ever wish you could take back a mistake, or you could only do a little? Other examples include, you said, look, I got engaged, coming right at the camera. And as an audience, we found that to be incredibly persuasive and to bring us right to that moment with you. I do think that you have some opportunities in this area. For example, I thought it was incredibly powerful when you used the camera and positioned yourself to have a conversation from daughter to mother. But I think that you also had that opportunity, for example, when you were talking about Candy Lighter's daughter walking home and being hit by a car. You use that real estate. That's an opportunity to use that same skill that you brought. The second area that I wanted to cover is how I heard you. I thought that you were incredibly effective in terms of your pitch and how you brought that to your speech. In particular, you said, it's supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And again, we were right there with you. Another example is when the daughter was hit by a car, you used a clap. Again, super effective. I think that there are opportunities for you to bring this same level of clarity to the front end of your speech. For example, when you were talking about Sherry Watson, we could imagine as an audience how frustrating that must have been for her. But I think that that's an opportunity for you as a speaker to bring that level of frustration to your voice. The third and last area I wanted to quickly cover is content. So you had a title, which is A Greater Mistake. And the mistake piece of it is somewhat negative. I do think there's an opportunity for you to reposition the title of this speech and talk about it being a moment of clarity. Because for us as an audience, you brought an extreme amount of clarity to this particular issue of how little moments can lead to big results. Madam Toastmaster.
Was a fantastic speech. It's one of those speeches where I want to say it was actually multiple speeches. One of the themes that was incredibly strong was strong women overcoming obstacles. You had three very strong women, each faced three very strong obstacles, and that's the kind of device that really pulls it together for me. I'm dying to know your mom's name, because she was one of the core characters, and that would just flesh things out quite nicely. The really awesome thing, I'm new to the speaking on cameras, and so when I find something new and fantastic, I gravitate towards it. And that's when you are acting as yourself, talking to your mother. And just that side-to-side, back and forth, created perfect characters. I don't know if that's something you came up with on your own, if that's something you found or were taught. That's an impressive one that I'm probably going to take on myself. And your stance overall was really strong. Here, centered up, delivering your message, except in the beginning. In the beginning, there was a lot of shiftiness back and forth as you're introducing the speech, as you're introducing the concept, and then it tightened up. So if you could take that strength of stance you had in the middle and the end of the speech and drag it all the way to the beginning, I think that'd make it even stronger. You opened up with a quote to set the stage, and then you introduced how your speech was going to work. And you skipped over a step. You started introducing a concept, and you said, I apologize, I forgot to say I'm going to give 3 people's stories. This happens a lot, to me at least, where I'll forget the way I wanted to introduce a topic. And the stronger thing to do is to not apologize for it. Just get the idea out, take a pause, and then reintroduce that I'm going to be sharing with you stories from 3 women. Now, your line from your mother, talking about your mother, you said, "She spoke that truth into my life." I want to thank you for that one. When I heard "she spoke that truth into my life," that was such a strong line. I think it could even be stronger than your call to action, which is, I can't do enough. I can only do a little, so I'll do nothing. And calling that the greater mistake. You have probably 3, 4 strong speeches in there, and your resonating message hits me, and I'm going to try to keep doing small things as well. Thank you.
A greater mistake. Overall, I have to say I was inspired. That was a very well thought out, relatable, and inspiring speech. I found it to be very well constructed. The stories flowed one right into the other, and they all felt homogeneous. They worked really well together. I liked how the emotion level of each one of them kind of flowed in an arc, and they all had a peak and a valley and an end. We didn't have this one gigantic overarching arc to the whole thing. I loved how the theme was reflected in each story, each time. Where I felt that you could improve, I noticed that you had a few false starts. You caught yourself on them. I don't think you realized that in your first story, almost every sentence started with she. In the second story, 3 of your sentences started with she. I would encourage you to re-examine the first and second story and perhaps maybe change word order so that you can find either alternative ways of stating it so that they don't always start with she, or perhaps different ways of referring to a feminine pronoun. I also caught, and I'm not sure that you're aware of it, a certain, it's subtle, distinct, but I caught it a few times. Where I found that you did well was your flow, your tempo, how you conveyed the emotions of each story. You did it without going over the top and really hammering the emotions of the story. Some of them were incredibly traumatic. You conveyed the emotions of those people without being overly dramatic to it. Where I found that you excelled was with your own personal body language, your great eye contact, which is very hard to do in this format, and your volume. Wrapping up, overall, I found your speech to be well constructed, delivered in an entertaining and informative manner that inspired, encouraged, and even challenged all of us to do more, even if it's just a little.